When you hear the word hell, what comes to your imagination? It is probably a painting we have known since childhood. Bottomless abysses burning with a fire that never goes out. Rivers of boiling pitch and molten metal. The wails of sinners are heard, tormented by red creatures with horns and tridents. It is a powerful image, carved by fear and dogma, perfected by centuries of sermons and terrifying frescoes. Billions of people, over dozens of generations, have lived and died with this vision etched in their minds. This leads us to the central question of our investigation. What if all of this is a lie? Not just an exaggeration or an inaccuracy, but a grand illusion created on purpose, a theatrical staging designed to hide something entirely different, something much more real, and because it is real, indescribably scarier than any caricature devil out of a fairy tale. It is time to start dismantling this lie. Our goal is not just to doubt the popular image of hell, but to prove its total inconsistency. And to do this, we will use our main analytical tool, the Pneuma system. We loaded into Pneuma the entire cultural, theological, and artistic history of the concept of hell over the last 3,000 years. And the results of this analysis are shocking. They prove that the image we have of that place is a relatively recent product, an artificial construction that has specific authors and very earthly objectives. Let's start with the main question. Where did these images come from? The fire, the sulfur, the demons with tridents. If you believe they are described in the original sources of the major religions, you are deeply mistaken. We entered the canonical texts, from the Old Testament to the Quran, into Pneuma, and performed a semantic search for key images. The system presented an impressive result. In none of these fundamental documents is there a detailed and systematic description of hell as a multi-level torture chamber administered by a demonic bureaucracy. There are indeed mentions of Gehenna, a place of darkness and lamentation, but they are vague, metaphorical suggestions, not a detailed guide to the afterlife. So where did this highly detailed nightmare come from? Pneuma's correlational analysis shows that 95% of popular representations of hell are late cultural additions. This cultural explosion has a precise date and name, the beginning of the 14th century, and the name Dante Alighieri. His Divine Comedy, especially the first part, Inferno, was what we would call today a media bomb. That was not a theological study. It was a brilliant poetic epic, a political pamphlet, and a personal drama, all wrapped in a grandiose form. Dante went beyond describing hell. He built it. He populated it with specific sinners, conveniently including his political enemies. He invented symbolic and complex punishments for each circle. Pneuma analyzed the influence of Dante's Inferno on European culture. The system's conclusion is unequivocal. This work became the actual canon, overshadowing and replacing the vague biblical images. Dante gave humanity what it did not have: a map of hell, a clear, understandable, and absolutely terrifying instruction. It was his images that artists like Botticelli and Hieronymus Bosch used as the basis for thousands of paintings, frescoes, and sculptures. They did not illustrate sacred texts, but rather Dante's visions. And each new work of art cemented this image in the collective unconscious. Generation after generation, people stopped separating poetic fiction from religious truth. The illusion became reality, but why did this illusion prove so necessary? The answer is simple and cynical and boils down to a single word: control. Fear is the most effective tool for social control that exists. Explaining the abstract concept of spiritual degradation to a 14th century peasant was an almost impossible task. Now showing him a vivid painting of his neighbor, the one he didn't like, eternally boiling in pitch, worked immediately and unfailingly. The theatricalized physical hell became a powerful lever of power in the hands of authorities. We entered 7,000 medieval sermons into Pneuma. The thematic analysis revealed that between the 14th and 15th centuries, The proportion of descriptions of physical torments in hell increased by more than 700%. It was a targeted information campaign. The illusion of hell ceased to be just a poet's fantasy and became a state ideology. The illusion itself needs to be dissected, starting with the main element, fire. Hell is almost always associated with eternal flames. Numa analyzed this archetype. Fire provides warmth, but it also causes unbearable pain. It is the perfect symbol for absolute suffering. However, in the original texts, everything is much more complex. The Hebrew word Sheol, often translated as hell, actually means place of silence, the realm of shadows. There is no fire there. The Greek Hades was likewise a somber, joyless, but cold place. Fire only entered the equation through Gehenna. And Gehenna was a real geographical location, the valley of Hinnom, south of Jerusalem. Anciently, it was a site for pagan rituals. Later, it became the city's garbage dump, where fires burned constantly to consume waste and animal carcasses. The smoke and smell of that place made it the ideal metaphor for impurity and destruction. The key word is metaphor, but lazy human consciousness took the metaphor and interpreted it literally. Jerusalem's dump grew in the imagination until it became the universal furnace. And the second element, demons, creatures with horns, hooves, and tridents. Numa cross-referenced the iconography of Christian demons with the images of deities from pre-Christian pagan cults. The result is astonishing, an 87% correlation. Horns, hooves, and a lascivious nature. These are the attributes of the ancient Greek god Pan and the satyrs, spirits of nature and fertility. Early Christianity was in an implacable war against paganism. And the most effective tactic was not to ban the ancient gods, but to transform them into monsters, to demonize them. The god of the woods became the prince of darkness. It was a brilliant propaganda operation, and the trident is the symbol of Poseidon, the god of the seas. The weapon of a powerful Olympian god was demoted to a vulgar tool for prodding sinners. The illusion is very well thought out, but it is human. Dante's hell reflects feudal society with its clear hierarchy, and its punishments are merely medieval tortures taken to the absurd. Numa's simulation shows that the probability of such a human structure existing in a supposed spiritual world tends to zero. But here lies the true danger of this illusion. It serves as a smokescreen, a puppet theater that distracts us from the true nature of hell. In the 21st century, people easily discard these images as fairy tales, and that is exactly where the trap lies. By rejecting the caricature, we risk also rejecting what it hides. And what is hidden there is a much more complex, sophisticated, and inevitable conception. The real hell, as Numa's primary data shows us, has nothing to do with physical pain. It is very different from what we imagine, because it is not a place you are sent to, but rather a state you enter. It is a state of consciousness, trapped in a vicious cycle, looking only at oneself. A prison built with your own regrets, fears, resentments, and unsatisfied desires. It is an endless cycle. You relive the most painful moment of your life over and over again. Again and again, you make the mistake that destroyed everything. Again and again, you feel the pain of betrayal or loss. Without stopping, without the ability to change anything, in complete isolation. This is the true hell. It is an internal collapse rather than an external punishment, the entropy of consciousness. And the executioner in this prison is yourself. There are no demons pushing you into a cauldron. Your own self, your ego, your mind, are at once the executioner, the cauldron, and the fire. Do you understand now why the illusion was so important? It replaces a complex and frighteningly realistic concept with a simple and silly fairy tale. A fairy tale that is easy to discard. It gives a false sense of security. I don't believe in devils. so I have nothing to fear. But the laws of physics don't care if you believe in them or not. They simply work. And the laws that govern consciousness work exactly the same way. We have torn the first veil. We have destroyed the scenery. The theatre is closed. The cardboard devils and the painted fire can no longer deceive us. But now the true image reveals itself, and it is much darker. We are about to investigate the real mechanism, not its medieval staging. To understand this mechanism, we need to become digital archaeologists. We activate the original source architecture protocol. Our mission is to invade ancient texts, to penetrate the semantic core of the words that, for millennia, have tried to describe what exists beyond the last breath. We will analyze 4 key concepts from 4 distinct cultural layers. We will analyze the Hebrew Sheol, the Greek Hades, the Aramaic Gehenna, and the Indian Naraka. Numa analyzed the original sources in their native languages with the order to separate original meanings from later interpretations. What we discovered will forever change your conception of hell. We begin with the oldest layer, the Old Testament. The word most associated with the underworld here is Sheol. Numa analyzed all 65 mentions of Sheol. The conclusion is shocking. In no context is Sheol described as a place of fiery torment or punishment for sins. This does not happen even once. So, what is Sheol? It is the realm of shadows, a place of silence, a dark and deep pit under the earth where all souls went without exception, righteous and sinners, kings and slaves. Sheol was the great leveler. In it, there is no hierarchy, no rewards, no punishments. There is no memory of earthly life, no joy, no sadness. It is anti-life, a state of total informational vacuum where the personality fades away. The fear of Sheol was not the fear of pain, but the fear of final disappearance. Now we go to the ancient world, Greece. Here, the realm of the dead is named after its ruler, Hades. At first glance, Hades and Sheol are similar, a subterranean, somber realm, full of shadows without joy. But there is a fundamental difference that became a turning point in the history of hell. In the Greek model, for the first time, the idea of differentiation appears. Numa analyzed the evolution of Greek myths. The trend is clear, moving from a single Hades for everyone. The structure evolved, special zones appeared. For great heroes, Elysium, a kind of paradise, and for the greatest villains and enemies of the gods, such as the Titans or King Tantalus, Tartarus appeared, the deepest pit beneath Hades, a place of eternal torment. It is here in Tartarus that the concept of conscious and eternal suffering as punishment is born. But it must be noted that in classical myth, only a few went to Tartarus. It was a maximum security prison, not a place for common sinners. For 99.9% of people, the fate was still the same grey and joyless existence. What is the importance of this? In the 1st century BC, Jewish scholars translated the Old Testament into Greek. This translation is the Septuagint. And they faced a problem of how to translate Sheol. They chose the Greek analogue, Hades. Numa identifies this moment as the point of semantic contamination. The two concepts merged. The neutral and single Sheol was stained with the somber tones of Hades and, most importantly, absorbed the idea of the possibility of punishment in a special zone, Tartarus. The seed was planted, but the main element for hell was missing. Fire was missing. And here enters Gehenna. As we said, Gehenna was a real place, the Valley of Hinnom, the Jerusalem dump. Numa recreated its psycho-historical image. For the listeners of that time, Gehenna was a metaphor for the absolute end, profanation, total destruction. It was where trash and the bodies of criminals unworthy of burial were burned. When Jesus used the image of Gehenna, of fire, his listeners knew what he was talking about. He was not describing a place of eternal torture. He used the strongest image they knew for complete annihilation. What is thrown into Gehenna does not suffer forever. It burns, turns to ash, disappears. It was a symbol of spiritual death. But over time, under the influence of the Greek idea of Tartarus, the metaphor was reinterpreted literally. Jerusalem's dump transformed into the universal torture chamber, but this model was not the only one, far from it. Let's go to the East. There we find the conception of Naraka. In Hinduism and Buddhism, at first glance, it is very similar. Texts describe hot and cold hells with complex torments. But there are two fundamental differences. The first difference is that Naraka is not eternal. The soul goes there for a set time to exhaust its negative karma. It is not so much a punishment as a process of purification, a cosmic quarantine. The second difference is that there is no external judge. The system is automatic, based on the impersonal law of cause and effect. Numa compares this to physics. If you drop a stone, it falls not because of a punishment from the god of gravity, but simply because that is the law. Similarly, a consciousness full of anger after death falls into a reality of suffering because its vibrational density corresponds to that place. What does this archaeology show us? It reveals 4 original blueprints, 4 distinct concepts. Sheol was about total oblivion. Hades introduced the idea of separation. Gehenna was a symbol of final destruction, and Naraka brought the concept of temporary purification. None of them described the hell we know. Numa then synthesized these 4 concepts, looking for a common denominator, and it found it. The fundamental principle is not fire, nor pain, nor demons. The principle is separation. Separation from the source of life, separation from light, separation from harmony, separation from reality. This is the original code of hell. It stops being a geographical place and becomes a vector, a direction of movement, from integrity to decay, from light to darkness. The true hell is the state of maximum isolation of consciousness. And when we understand this, a new and disturbing question arises. What drives this process? What pushes consciousness in this direction? Is it a divine punishment for breaking rules? Or is it an impersonal and inevitable law of the universe, like gravity or thermodynamics? We have reached a crossroads. If the true hell is this vector of isolation, this separation from reality, the trillion-dollar question is, what pushes us in that direction? Is it the verdict of a divine judge or an impersonal law of the universe, as inevitable as gravity? Many visualize a courtroom, a majestic, silent, absolute hall. In the dock is your consciousness stripped of the body before a supreme judge. In his hands is the book of your life, where every act, every word, every fleeting thought is recorded. The accuser reads the list of your mistakes. The scales of justice swing, and then the verdict is read, guilty. The sentence, eternity in hell. This image of a cosmic judgment is the cornerstone of our civilization. It sustains our morality, our laws, our deepest sense of justice. The idea is simple. There is a law, there is a violation, there is a punishment, crime and punishment. This model is logical to the human mind, but perhaps it has absolutely nothing to do with how the universe actually works. What if, in reality, there is no judge, no accuser, and no sentence? What if hell is the direct consequence of sin, rather than a punishment for it? We activate the punishment vector protocol. Our goal is to dissect the very idea of retribution. We fed Numa thousands of pages of theological doctrines, philosophical treatises on justice, and the fundamental laws of nature. And the system found a fundamental contradiction. Let's start by analyzing the judicial model and where it came from. Numa's historical cultural analysis is clear. We created divine justice in the image and likeness of our own earthly justice. Our judge God is a projection of our king, our pharaoh, our emperor, an all-powerful ruler who establishes laws and punishes those who disobey them. This model was effective for managing society. It transferred the authority of earthly power to the heavens, making it absolute. But despite its social effectiveness, this model collapses under rigorous logical analysis. The first paradox is proportion, a finite crime against an infinite punishment. A person lives 80 years. Even if they were the worst person in history, their crimes occurred within a limited period of time. The idea that a finite set of errors results in eternal and infinite torment violates any principle of proportionality. Numa calculates this as an act of infinite disproportion, incompatible with the concept of absolute justice. A just judge cannot apply an unjust sentence. The second paradox is even deeper, the problem of omniscience versus free will. If a supreme being knows everything, he knows our every choice before we are even born. He knows the outcome of our life at the moment of our conception. In such a system, speaking of true freedom of choice becomes extremely difficult. But if there is no real freedom, there can be no real responsibility. Punishing a mechanism programmed to execute its programming is an absurdity. Numa demonstrates that theologians have been trying to resolve this for centuries, but it is insoluble within the judicial model. These logical flaws indicate that we are dealing with a simplified metaphor, not a description of reality. The universe operates by the laws of physics and not by the laws of a human courtroom. And here we come to the alternative model that Numa defines as the causal or physical model. It's like standing on the edge of a cliff. You take a step forward, you fall. Did someone punish you for taking that step? Was there a trial that sentenced you to fall? Not at all. The fall happens as a direct and inevitable consequence of the step, dictated by the impersonal law of gravity. It is not a punishment. The law of gravity doesn't care if you are a good or bad person. It doesn't judge your intentions. It simply works. This same principle applies when we swap taking a step off a cliff for an act full of hate. And let's swap the law of gravity for the law of cause and effect for consciousness, a law that in the East is called karma. Every action generates an equal and opposite reaction. Every thought of yours, every word, is more than an event. It is an emission of energy with a specific quality, a specific vibration. And this energy doesn't disappear into nothingness. It changes two things: the world around you, and more importantly, it changes the source of that energy. It changes you. Modern neuroscience gives us a perfect physical model of this process: neuroplasticity. When you habitually practice anger, the neural connections in your brain that respond to anger strengthen. It becomes easier and more habitual to feel anger in the future. You literally pave a path for anger in your nervous system. You change the architecture of your brain. You literally transform into anger itself. What happens is the direct physiological result of anger, not a punishment for it. Numa simulated this principle, extrapolating it beyond the physical body. If consciousness survives the brain, it maintains its structure, its habits, its paved paths. A consciousness that has spent its entire life cultivating hatred, envy, and fear is not sent to a place full of these energies because it itself becomes that place. This is hell, which functions as a self-sustaining internal system, operating by its own laws and not as an external prison. In this model, the very meaning of sin changes. Instead of being the violation of an item in a divine penal code, sin is an action that harms, first and foremost, the person who practices it. It is a spiritual poison. When you take a poison, your subsequent suffering is the direct biochemical consequence of your act and not a punishment. Likewise, hate, lies, and cruelty are poisons for consciousness. They destroy its structure. Hell is simply the chronic stage of this self-poisoning. We destroyed the idea of external punishment, replaced it with the idea of internal consequence. But this generates a new and even deeper question. If hell is a self-sustaining state of consciousness trapped in suffering, what exactly is the nature of this suffering? If there is no physical fire or demons, what exactly torments the soul? What does this internal collapse actually feel like? So far, we have dealt with abstraction. We dismantled the judicial model and replaced it with a model of spiritual physics. But this is still a theory. We reach the question that ended our last stage. What is the sensation of this internal collapse? If there is no fire, what exactly burns? If there are no demons, what exactly torments? We have to go beyond theoretical models and enter direct phenomenological experience. We need to understand what this suffering is made of. For this, we activate the most complex protocol so far, the psychomatrix of suffering. Our task is to simulate the internal experience of a consciousness that has fallen into its own trap. Numa processed a gigantic data set, from clinical studies on trauma and intrusive memories to mystical descriptions of the dark night of the soul. The system looked for universal patterns of suffering and extrapolated them to infinity. For a consciousness without a body, there is no difference between a real event and the memory of it. For us, the living, a memory is a pale copy of reality. We can remember the pain of a burn, but we don't feel it with the same intensity. It is a defense mechanism of our brain, but what happens when this mechanism is gone? Numa's simulation of a consciousness without brain filters is clear. In this state, the memory is relived with the same intensity, or perhaps even greater, than the original event. Information becomes reality. Consciousness after death is an archive, the library of your entire life, but there is no order in this library. All the books are open at the same time, and the brightest, most emotionally charged moments, especially the negative ones, glow like neon signs. The moment you betrayed a friend, the moment you lied and it ruined someone's life, the moment your cruelty or indifference led to irreparable consequences. In life, you could distract yourself, you could forget, drown out these memories with work, entertainment, alcohol. But now there is nowhere to distract yourself. There is nothing but consciousness itself, and it is forced to watch. This is the first phase of hell that Numa defines as the total review. But you are not a mere spectator, you are a participant. And here the second, scariest phase happens. You begin to fully feel the pain you caused others. It is empathic feedback. In life, our ego serves as a powerful shield, blocking this feeling. But now the ego, without its bodily support, dissolves. You feel your victim's suffering as if it were your own. You feel the humiliation of the one you insulted, the despair of the one you deceived, the pain of the one you hurt. And this repeats again and again. This leads us to the third phase, the loop of regret. Consciousness not only relives the past, it desperately tries to change it. Every time it finds itself within the traumatic memory, it screams, "This time, I will act differently." You see yourself about to say those cruel and fatal words and try to stop yourself, but you cannot. The script has already been written. You pronounce them again. You see the pain appear on the face of the loved one, and your current consciousness breaks with despair. But you cannot change anything. You are trapped like an actor in a play that you yourself wrote and whose ending is always a catastrophe. Numa compares this mechanism to a corrupted file on a hard drive that the system tries to read again and again, always crashing in the same place. It is an informational cycle with no way out, and in this cycle is born the most agonizing feeling of all, powerless regret. Oh, if only this phrase becomes the fuel for the eternal fire, a non-physical fire, but a psychological one. Although it is a powerful theoretical model, the question of empirical evidence remains. Are there any witnesses? We activate the Witness Anomaly Protocol. There are tens of thousands of documented stories of people who have undergone clinical death. These are called near-death experiences, or NDEs. Most describe light and bliss, but there is a darker side. A smaller percentage of people report journeys of deep suffering. For a long time, these stories were dismissed as hallucinations from lack of oxygen in the brain. But what if there is a pattern in this chaos? We loaded more than 3,000 of these negative cases into Pneuma, stripping away all cultural varnish. The system was instructed to ignore interpretations like "I saw demons" and focus only on the phenomena described, the emotions, the sensations, the states of consciousness. And what the system found is the strongest confirmation of our model. The first pattern present in almost 80% of cases is the life review with empathic feedback. Witnesses, one after another, describe how they were forced to relive every moment they hurt someone, but from the other person's perspective. A typical account is that of a father who yelled at his son. In the experience, he didn't just see the scene, he became the son. He felt the child's fear, the way his little heart tightened. Every tear his son shed because of him, he felt as his own. The second pattern found is the cycle of anguish. Many describe falling into a space where the same event or feeling repeated infinitely, being trapped in a room with nothing but the feeling of absolute loneliness for an eternity. This perfectly mirrors our model of the loop of regret and isolation. Theory and practical data converge. Hell is not an invention. It is a real and observable phenomenon, a post-death condition. And its architecture is exactly as we predicted, confirming that it is an internal collapse and not an external punishment. But this convergence raises the most critical question of all. If hell is a self-sustaining and cyclical system, is there a way out, or is the sentence final? We have descended to the bottom. We confronted the architecture of the psychological hell, a self-sustaining cyclical system where consciousness remains trapped in an infinite loop of its own regret and pain. We saw how reports of near-death experiences confirm this model of empathic feedback and total isolation. And now we are standing at the gate of this prison. Theory and practical evidence have converged, and they raise the most terrifying question of all. If hell is a singularity of consciousness, a closed system, is there a way out, or is the verdict forever? This question has divided religions and philosophers for millennia. The answer to it defines our understanding of justice, mercy, and the final purpose of existence. Is the universe a system where some souls are saved and others are eternally cursed? Or is it a dynamic system where even the deepest fall is just part of a longer journey? We activate the exit protocol. Our mission is to conduct a cold analysis of the various theories of salvation. We loaded all of them into Pneuma, from the dogma of the eternity of punishments to the controversial doctrine of universal restoration. The system will evaluate the logical coherence of each model based on the physics of the soul that we have already established. Let's start with the darkest and most dominant doctrine in the West, the eternity of torment. The idea is simple and brutal. After death and judgment, the sinner's soul goes to hell forever, without the right to appeal, without a chance for correction, and without any hope. Pneuma performed a logical stress test on this doctrine. This doctrine fails on multiple parameters. To begin with, it directly conflicts with the attribute of a God who would be absolute goodness. If God is absolute love, how can he allow the existence of eternal and meaningless torture for his own creation? Any earthly father, with the minimum of compassion, would eventually forgive his son. The idea that human mercy could be superior to divine mercy is a logical paradox. Furthermore, it conflicts with the idea of omnipotence. If God is all-powerful, his will must ultimately be fulfilled throughout the universe. The existence of an eternal hell as an autonomous realm of evil and suffering means that God's will is not absolute. This creates a dualistic image of the world, where good and evil are in eternal balance, which contradicts the very basis of monotheism. And perhaps most importantly, it is a conflict of purpose. What is the sense of an eternal punishment? Any reasonable punishment has one of two objectives: to correct the criminal or to protect society from them. Eternal torment does not correct because it gives no chance for change, and it does not protect because the society of the saved would already be secure. Such punishment becomes pure and meaningless sadism. Numa defines it as without final purpose. If the eternity of torment is logically unlikely, what is the alternative? In the Catholic tradition, there is an intermediate station, purgatory, a state where souls who died in grace but are not yet fully purified undergo a cleaning process to become worthy of heaven. Numa analyzed this concept. It is much more logical. First, it introduces the idea of a process, not a static sentence. The soul is not just punished, but is being changed. Suffering here has the clear purpose of purification. This fits perfectly into our physical model, where hell is a state caused by internal toxins of consciousness. Purgatory would essentially be a spiritual detoxification. Second, this model assumes the process is finite. Suffering lasts only as long as necessary for healing, rather than lasting forever. This restores the principle of proportionality. However, the traditional conception of purgatory has a limitation. It is not for everyone. Mortal sinners still go to eternal hell. Purgatory solves the problem of small errors, but not the problem of large ones. We need to go deeper. And here we find the most radical ideas. We have already mentioned the Eastern Naraka, where hell is a long but temporary learning phase. But a similar idea existed at the heart of early Christianity. It is known as apokatastasis, or universal restoration. It was defended by great thinkers like Origen and Gregory of Nyssa. The essence is this: in the end, God's love will triumph over all evil and all suffering. All intelligent creatures will be saved, including all sinners, and in some interpretations, even the devil himself. Hell, in this model, functions as a temporary, albeit terrible, spiritual hospital rather than an eternal prison, a place from which, in the end, all patients will emerge completely cured. This doctrine was condemned as heresy in the year 553, mainly for political reasons. It removed the Church's main tool of control: fear. Leaving dogmas aside, let's concentrate purely on logic. Numa attributes to apokatastasis the highest rating of logical coherence. Why? Because it is the only theory that resolves all paradoxes. It affirms the absolute goodness and absolute power of God. It gives suffering a final purpose: healing. It transforms the entire cosmic drama from a meaningless massacre into a complex but ultimately successful process of returning all creation to its source. But how mechanically would this exit occur? If consciousness is trapped in an information loop, how can it break that cycle? Numa, basing itself on the restoration model, offers two hypotheses. The first is internal exhaustion. The destructive program, being self-destructive by nature, cannot sustain itself forever. Like a fire that goes out after consuming all fuel, the loop of hate or regret eventually exhausts its own energy. In the silence and vacuum that follow, consciousness may have a microscopic chance to generate a new thought, to make a new choice. The second hypothesis is external intervention, a divine hack. At a certain point, when consciousness hits the absolute bottom of its fall, an external impulse can penetrate its closed system. In theology, this is called grace. In information theory, we could call it an injection of saving code. Our investigation leads us to a severe but hopeful conclusion. An exit from hell most likely exists. However, this exit is not an easy amnesty, but rather a long and agonizing process of transformation that can take eons. Hell is not a dead end, but rather the bottom of the canyon, from which an incredibly long and difficult climb begins. We established that hell is a state, and that from this state a theoretical exit exists. But would it be possible to describe all of this in a language that a 21st century man can understand? A language not of theology, but of science? What if the laws governing hell could be described by quantum mechanics formulas? In the next stage, we will make the boldest attempt of our investigation. We will try to build a bridge between ancient mysticism and cutting-edge physics. Up to this point, our journey has traversed the corridors of theology, psychology, and philosophy. We have used terms that, although redefined, are still ancient: punishment, salvation, soul. But for the modern mind, educated by the scientific method, these words might sound archaic. Is it possible that all of this can be described in another way? Perhaps hell is not a theological concept, but rather a physical phenomenon that we do not yet know how to measure. Here we take the most radical step in our investigation. We will try to build the bridge over the abyss that separates mysticism from physics. We activate the quantum singularity protocol. Our mission is to find scientific analogues for the states we described as hell. We loaded into NUMA terabytes of data from the most advanced areas of science: quantum mechanics, information theory, cosmology, and neurobiology. We asked the system to find parallels, analogies, and direct correlations between ancient descriptions of hell and modern scientific theories about the nature of reality and consciousness. What we found may sound like science fiction, but as we know, any sufficiently deep physics is indistinguishable from mysticism. The fundamental property of hell that we identified is isolation. Hell is the state of maximum separation, consciousness locked inside itself. Is there an analogue for this in modern physics? Yes, it is called the event horizon of a black hole. A black hole is a region of space-time whose gravitational attraction is so intense that nothing can escape it, not even light. The boundary of this region is the event horizon. Anything that crosses this boundary is forever cut off from the rest of the universe. No information, no signal can get out. It is the perfect physical metaphor for absolute isolation. Now let's consider that consciousness is not just a product of the brain, but a fundamental field, like the gravitational field. Numa developed a hypothetical model of the gravity of consciousness. In this model, our acts and thoughts alter the density of our personal consciousness field. Actions based on love, compassion, and unity make our consciousness light and expansive. Actions based on selfishness, hatred, and fear make it heavy and dense. If over a lifetime a person systematically thickens their consciousness, they can reach a critical mass. At the moment of death, when the connection to the physical body is cut, this super-dense consciousness can collapse upon itself, just like a dying star, and form its own individual event horizon. This is hell in terms of physics, a consciousness that has become a black hole to itself. It is forever cut off from the information field of the universe, locked inside its own infinite gravity. No external light, no help can penetrate this horizon. This does not happen as a punishment, but as the direct consequence of exceeding the critical spiritual mass. Now let's go to the second aspect we identified, the loop of regret, the eternal repetition of the same agonizing scenario. Physics has an analog for this. It is the concept of a closed, time-like curve. Einstein's theory of relativity allows for exotic solutions, where space-time curves so much that a path to the future brings it back to its own past. It is essentially a time machine that always returns you to the same point. Numa simulated what the sensation of existing within such a curve would be like. The conclusion would be an endless déjà vu. You relive the same moment again and again, perhaps fully aware that you have already been there. You try to act differently, but you cannot, because your next action is already determined by your previous appearance at that same point. It is the perfect scientific description of the psychological torment we defined. The third aspect, suffering. We defined it as an informational phenomenon rather than a physical one. Modern information theory gives us a powerful tool to describe it. Entropy. In thermodynamics, entropy is the measure of chaos and disorder. But in information theory, it also measures uncertainty, the absence of meaningful information. Static white noise is a perfect parallel. There is a huge amount of data there, but no structure, no meaning. It is a state of maximum informational entropy. Human consciousness is a system that seeks meaning, that creates order out of chaos. Hell, then, is the state of maximum informational entropy for consciousness. All your memories, thoughts, and feelings dissolve into a chaotic and meaningless noise. It is the collapse of identity, the loss of all meaning. This is pain in its purest form. It is the pain of total lack of meaning, much deeper than the pain of fire. This is perhaps the second death mentioned in ancient texts, which would be an informational death and not a physical one. With this, we assembled the scientific model of hell. It is a singularity of consciousness with three properties. It is surrounded by an event horizon, which ensures total isolation. Furthermore, within it, time is cyclical, creating eternal repetition. Finally, its internal state is of maximum entropy, which equates to deep suffering and the loss of meaning. This model is scary, but it also gives us the key to how not to go there. If hell is the collapse into isolation and chaos, the path of salvation is movement in the opposite direction. What opposes entropy? Order, structure, meaning, information. What opposes isolation, connection, unity, love? Love, in this context, transcends simple emotion and acts as a fundamental anti-gravitational and anti-entropic force. It connects individual consciousnesses into a network, preventing them from collapsing into lonely black holes of suffering. The commandments, thou shalt not kill, love thy neighbor, stop looking like arbitrary rules and reveal themselves as a true safety manual for operating consciousness. They are the laws of spiritual thermodynamics. By violating them, instead of angering a deity, you are increasing your own entropy and your own gravitational mass, moving closer to your personal event horizon. We built the bridge. We saw that ancient mystics and modern physicists, using different languages, described the same reality. A reality where our moral choices have direct physical consequences on the structure of our consciousness. Now, we need to synthesize everything we have learned into a clear algorithm. What exactly are the laws, the mental states that lead to this collapse? We need a diagnostic map. This leads us to define which states of consciousness are the super-heavy elements of the soul, the ones that guarantee the journey toward darkness. We have made a colossal journey. We crossed the darkest corridors of cosmology and consciousness. We started by demolishing a childish myth of fire and brimstone, only to discover a much more frightening reality, a psychological hell, an internal collapse. We analyzed the witnesses, traced the physics of the soul, replacing the divine judge with the impersonal law of cause and effect. We even built a scientific model, seeing hell as a singularity of consciousness, a personal black hole of isolation and entropy. Now we reach the final stage, the practical stage. If hell is a state that we ourselves create, what exactly are the tools we use to build it? There are laws that lead to collapse. We need to formulate them. We activate the final protocol, the entry algorithm. Numa synthesized all our data, from ancient texts to neurobiology, to identify the universal patterns of a destructive consciousness. It is not about violating religious commandments. It is about fundamental states of being, vibrations that function as spiritual poison, regardless of your belief. The system identified 3 of these states, three great heavy elements of the soul that increase its gravitational mass and pull it toward collapse. The system identified the first and most fundamental of these states, non-acceptance, which can be understood as the act of declaring war against reality. It is that constant thought that tells us, this should not have happened. Why did this happen to me? The world is unfair. Every time you mentally fight against a fact that has already occurred, you create friction between your consciousness and the flow of existence. Numa models this as trying to swim against a powerful current. It causes immense suffering, spends colossal energy, and invariably leads to exhaustion. Non-acceptance of the past fuels the loop of regret we spoke about. Non-acceptance of the present, hating your body, your work, your surroundings, builds the bricks of your prison. Hell, in its essence, is the absolute form of non-acceptance. It is a consciousness that has rejected reality so much that reality, in exchange, has isolated it in its own world of pain. This leads us to the second element of the algorithm, separation, which manifests as judgment. This is the tool that the ego uses to fragment the world. It is the tool the ego uses to draw lines, separating me against them, us against others, good against evil. Every time you feel superior to someone, you are separating yourself. Every time you hate a group, you are separating yourself. Every time you judge and condemn, you are building a wall. Why is this a direct path to hell? Because hell is the state of absolute separation. And as we saw in the witness reports, empathic feedback will force you to feel the exact pain that your judgment and hatred caused others. And finally, the third element is fear. Fear is more than an emotion. It is a state of contraction. Numa shows that 99% of our fears are ghosts. Do we fear what happened in the past, which is a form of non-acceptance? Or do we fear what might happen in the future, which is an escape from the present? Fear is what compresses consciousness, makes it dense and small, preparing it for collapse. Non-acceptance, separation, and fear. These are the three components. They work together. Non-acceptance of reality generates fear. Fear makes us judge and separate ourselves from others to feel safe. It is the vicious cycle that builds the prison, brick by brick, here and now. But if this is the diagnosis, what is the cure? If there is an entry algorithm, there must be an exit instruction. We activate the Salvation Instruction Protocol. Numa analyzed millennia of human wisdom, from meditative practices to modern therapies, to find the direct antidotes to these three poisons. The antidote to non-acceptance is radical acceptance, which should not be confused with passivity. It doesn't mean you have to like what happened. It means you stop fighting an impossible war against reality. You accept the fact of what happened. You stop spending energy fighting the past and release that energy to act constructively in the present. The antidote to separation is active compassion, which goes beyond passive pity. It is the deliberate act of trying to understand the other's pain. It is the effort to see the human being behind the label, even in the one you consider your enemy. Every small act of kindness, of active listening, of empathy, dissolves a brick from the ego's wall. It is the most powerful technology for breaking the illusion of isolation, and the antidote to fear is conscious presence, the practice of anchoring your mind in the here and now. You cannot be afraid when you are totally focused on your breathing, on what you are doing at this exact second. Conscious presence takes the power away from the ghosts of the past and the projections of the future. It expands consciousness instead of contracting it. Acceptance, compassion, presence. This is the work. This is the instruction. This leads us to the final revelation. Numa processed everything we learned, and the conclusion is of a shocking simplicity. Hell is the eternal, impartial, and perfect reflection of your own consciousness. The universe functions like a mirror, for it only reflects you without judging. If you project anger, judgment and fear into the mirror of existence, the mirror reflects back to you a universe of anger, judgment, and fear. The torment seems eternal because if you stand in front of the mirror making a face of pain forever, the mirror will reflect that face forever. To change the reflection, you must change the face. Our salvation instruction is literally a guide on how to change the expression of your spiritual face. Radical acceptance relaxes the muscles of your consciousness. Active compassion projects light toward the mirror instead of darkness. Conscious presence cleans the mirror of ghosts. Hell is not, therefore, something created to punish us. We realize then that we ourselves are its architects. We carry the blueprint of it within us. Every thought of hate, every word of judgment is a stroke we add to this project. And one day, when the curtain of life falls, we will be alone with our reflection. Our investigation is concluded. We started with the question, what is hell? And now we have the answer. Hell is the state of being eternally locked with the reflection of your own soul. The only way not to go there is to start beautifying that soul. And that work begins right now. If you like this report, your subscription to the channel helps us continue investigating themes like this. We would love to read your reflection on the subject in the comments and know which city you are following us from. I thank you for your company until the end.